neighborhoods where people have lived for generations. So what do we do about that? Well, you listen to the neighbors, first of all, about what they want their neighborhood to be like. And then we found that there were individuals in West Louisville who needed up to $30,000 to invest in vacant and abandoned properties so then they could flip or rent for affordable housing. What's so beautiful about investing in those individuals is that they're participating in the revitalization of their own neighborhoods rather than seeing people from the East End or elsewhere coming in and participating in the revitalization and making all the money off of flipping or renting housing. So again, the strategy to listen to community members and then invest in a place like a CDFI, like our home, that's going to get the capital directly to the people that then are empowered to live in the neighborhood they want to live in and make the neighborhood the way they want to make it. Another example of that is in West Louisville, the housing stock is very old. And we were finding that people had serious home repairs and energy efficiency issues that they couldn't get a home equity line of credit for, right? Because the appraised values are a lot of mainstream financial institutions in West Louisville. So El Home came up with an energy efficiency home repair loan, very low interest, to help homeowners save on their utility costs, invest in their homes, build equity, and then have an asset to pass on to future beneficiaries. This is the way we build wealth in this country, is through home ownership. So investing in a CDFI has this multiplier effect of promoting ownership to the people in the neighborhood, small businesses, cooperative businesses, and housing. So there are real opportunities to affect change. But we've got to invest, smart, effective investments, and listening to community members.
Thank you, Amy. That was great. I want to address one of the questions about representation on the boards of nonprofits as well as organizations. I'd love to tap Brandy and then Ann Coffey. You could talk about that.
Well, thank you for the question. I think we need to get really clear about what we mean by diversity and representation. And so for me, that becomes a really tactical as well as nuanced topic. When we're talking about diversity, what often happens is we might want to change the racial demographic of our boards. We might want to change the gender demographics of our board. If we look most recently at California, I think in January of 2020, it was mandated that there had to be at least one woman on all corporate boards in California. So we can see some of those changes that happen through policies that will help to influence the way that we do our practice. But that question is a real sobering one, and one that we all need to take consideration of. Every single organization in this city is having an issue with diversity and representation on their boards, whether that be corporate organizations or that be the nonprofit organizations, because we want to see our full community at play. And so one way that we're doing it at the Humana Foundation in our Community Partners program, we were strategic and intentional in saying, tell us about the diversity, equity, and inclusion of your leadership. We were looking at executive leadership in organizations. We've been looking at the board leadership, really where the power lies in an organization to make those policy changes, to make some of those shifts in how the organization will do their procedural work in the community. And what we found is that we would come back and there would be statements of, we're working on it, or there would be statements of, we don't discriminate against anyone. And we have to be intentional. We've talked a lot so far in terms of matching up against our peer cities, and our peer cities are being intentional about the philanthropic giving that they have in their community. We need to also be intentional about the leadership that we see at all levels of our organization. We know that our organizations got this way purposefully, right? And so that's a sobering conversation that we have to have in terms of how do we let go of power in community? How do we make sure that our boards are made up of the individuals that they're serving? And so that means that, are there young people on your board? It shouldn't just look like those who are economically able to match each other's bank accounts, so to speak, but those who have voice in the community in terms of, are they affecting change about what's happening to them? I love the federally qualified health center model in terms of having their board makeup look like the community members that they're serving. Are we talking about, do we see board leadership from, yes, our racial equity that we have to have in this community? Are our corporations and our nonprofit boards and our foundation boards, do we see representation on those boards of individuals of color, and particularly our Black individuals, our Black, Indigenous, and other people of color in this community? So I think it is a great question. It is one that we need to start intentionally funding if we are not able to answer in our own organizations. And even for organizations that are funding in that regard, we need to turn the mirror on ourselves and say, are we looking up and down our own leadership to make sure that that can happen?
Awesome. Anne, do you want to also take a stab at this?
Sure. So this is a question that the Center for Nonprofit Excellence deals with a lot. And we tailor our programming and our learning and all kinds of board presentations and so forth. But I think, for those of us that have served on boards and have sat around that table and talked about, oh, we need to expand our board, we need to expand the diversity around our board, what we typically do is we reach out to our natural networks, right? It's just human nature to do that. So who do we know? Who do we know that knows someone? And that's typically how it's done. And we have to bust out of that old pattern and figure out innovative ways to reach out deep into other parts of the community where we don't have those relationships, or we don't know people. So how do we do that? One of the tools that we've created at the Center for Nonprofit Excellence is called Board Match. And it's literally an online platform where you can go on and sign up if you want to be a member of a board. And we have organizations, over 700 organizations, that have their profiles up there looking for particular type of board members, whether it might be around diversity or it might be around finance, it may be, name your topic. But it's a way to reach out and move into other networks and connect with people you typically don't connect with. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have. And we default, right? We just, I don't want to say we get lazy, but we do get to a place where we just need to find ways to be able to connect with other communities. I'm starting to talk in circles. The other thing I think we can think about is, how do we get into this mission match space with corporations, right? So how do we use those networks, whether we find corporations that may care about, or have a mutual benefit to match with a nonprofit that may be close to them geographically, or may be close to them in terms of what they're trying to accomplish in their work, and find the mutual benefit, right? And that's what makes it sustainable, if that makes sense. So there are lots of ways to attack this, and we're getting better at it, but it is still a difficult and challenging process. So.
Great, thank you, Amy. We've had a couple of questions about, or thoughts about, return on investment. And I would love to invite Tricia Finnegan and Lopa Mahotra to kind of talk about both the return for the community and the return for an individual on this kind of investment.
Absolutely, Ben. For us, we look at capital and investment in 4 forms. So financial, social, human, and data-based. And so there are returns in each one of those investments as well. We look particularly a lot at not just financial returns, but also specifically on the social returns. So what are the impacts that we can see from our investments on lives changed, individuals supported? We've done a lot of work on our individual grant making at the Community Foundation, and we continue to work with donors and community partners to look at, what are the impacts of the investments that you're making? What are you hoping to impact? And how can you leverage your investments so that you can increase that impact that you're hoping for. And again, oftentimes people go immediately to financial, but we often look for those social impacts as well. And looking at the impact of measuring impact in ways that you're not necessarily expecting. One of the challenges to that is the patience that it takes to measure change. So looking at making an investment in early childhood education and how that impacts someone over a lifetime then takes the patience and the stamina to stick with an investment over time. And so we continue to look for ways to measure that social impact of our investments and to continue to work with others in the community and looking at how can we find alignment around investment. What do we care about? We really believe that cross-sector partnership is needed. Not any one sector can solve our challenges and needs on our own. And so where do the corporate sector, the independent sector, government sector, where do we all share an interest? And how can we then align around an ROI that can mean that we can invest together? So we continue to look at that side, particularly around the social impact measures.
Lopa? Lopa, you're muted, sorry.
All right. Well, what I was saying is thank you so much for the question, and I'm so excited about one potential answer to it that I might gush a little bit, so everybody bear with me. We started off with Ben challenging us to think about what would it take to unlock this capacity in the social sector. And the mayor challenged us to think about it in the context that the stakes are high and the time is right. And Tricia just put out there that we can't solve these challenges and needs on our own. So how do we come together to do it? And so I'm actually going to take us back to what Amy was talking about in terms of CDFIs. To me, CDFIs are such a powerful and way underutilized tool in our community. I would imagine that if we were to look at the number of CDFIs in our peer cities, that we could certainly grow in this area, not just in supporting the CDFIs that we already have, but also in looking at how to attract new CDFIs in parts of the city and region that aren't being addressed yet. Why I think CDFIs are such an important part of the equation is that they're listening to what the community needs. So back to what Tricia said, how do we solve challenges and needs on our own? It begins by listening really carefully, critically, and as often as we can to what the community is telling us. CDFIs are so valuable, as Amy said, because they promote community ownership. Home ownership is one piece of the puzzle. Business ownership is a huge piece of the puzzle. And then when it comes to thinking about it in terms of individual philanthropy or non-corporate philanthropy in our community, why I think this is so exciting is that for our family, as one example, we were able to work with the Community Foundation of Louisville through their Impact Capital program to connect with a CDFI that was launching a project in an area that we really care about. We're a foodie family. We love entrepreneurs and supporting entrepreneurship as well. And so when the Community Foundation presented us with the opportunity to invest in chef space, we really jumped at it. And what was so exciting is that our contribution of a loan, very low interest, long-term loan to catalyze that CDFI program created a multiplier so that more and other people could come in and grow entrepreneurship. So finally, when we're looking at CDFIs in our community, there's a real multiplier possibility where we're using our community dollars to attract other national dollars and potentially federal dollars as well. So when we look at what is the opportunity here and unlocking the potential that Ben is pointing us to, it's that as we do more in a significant way together, that we can actually attract more from outside this region. And I'd like to point us in that direction as well.
Thanks, Lopa. We've had a lot of questions and thoughts around the role of the public sector in this kind of work, and I would like to hand over to the mayor. Could you respond to some of these thoughts around what you think the role of Metro government is, in order to up the public spending per capita in our community.
Sure. And thanks, Ben, for the data. We've been looking for this for a long time, so it's super valuable for us. One thing just before I talk about the public sector is, I'm really heartened by our high participation rate in terms of high net worth individuals. I think we should start a community campaign, give a little more. We're just talking about 1% more. If that would get us $75 million, that would be transformative for a nonprofit. So I would be happy to participate and give a little more, or give a lot more for that matter. But I think now that we have this data out there, let's really get after it. Second, on the public investment, in many ways, government, especially local government, we're kind of the gap fillers, right? We're the provider of needs that the private sector doesn't see a return on investment for. So when you think about government spending, oftentimes it is that equitable spending that we need more of in the community. So our challenge and what we have to do is we have to advocate for change in a state law. Most all of our competitive cities have the ability to do local referenda for capital projects or social or human capacity expansion projects like universal pre-K. We don't have that capacity in our city. You'll remember the whole local option effort that we have worked on for years. So if we could get that in our city, we can't give up. That will increase the amount of money that we can be spending from the public sector side. Absent that, Louisville is going to continue to support the rest of the state the way that we are, just like the federal government supports the state of Kentucky. And that's what happens for us as the biggest city in the state. But we need to have more flexibility. So we need to get back to that local option that we had before so we can compete on that particular area. So we can have more down payment assistance programs, for instance. So we can have more home repair programs. Amy spoke beautifully to that. Those stabilized neighborhoods, they increase home ownership, which is the number way to increase wealth and the number one way for us to fight back about the historic legacy of redlining. And there are ways that when we engage the community, like we've done at the Vision Russell Project, over 100 meetings of the people in the Russell neighborhood with Jackie Floyd and Anthony Smith, Bo Stillwell, and many others to get that kind of listening that we talked about so that Russell Place of Promise is the community that the residents of Russell want, where it regenerates without displacement. Okay? Gentrification means places are getting nicer. You want them to be nicer, but you don't want the people that live there to have to move out. And that's what our goal is, to regenerate without displacement all throughout the community. But we need more money to do that. And we can do that both through private investing, give a little more, or we can do it through changing state laws so we can invest more in ourselves.
So we are closing in on our time. I want to be sure to create some space for some of the issues that have been raised about authentic community engagement. And so I would love to invite Dr. Unseld and Dr. Kelly Pryor to talk about that. Dr. Unseld.
Hi, thank you, Ben. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I just want to make sure that we recognize that more money into the current system may not be the change that we're seeking. We need to do a lot of self-reflection, a lot of self-examination as to how we have upheld these racist and oppressive systems. So if we get more money into these systems that many in the community see as failed systems or racist systems, how is that going to help? I also hear a lot about listening. A lot of things that we're hearing now, we've been saying for decades. If you haven't been listening by now, we're tired of having to re-educate you. So this is authentic community engagement, relationship building, and look at who's not here. We don't see a lot of community members here. And I think that's something we need to note. And then two last things. One, do we see our community investment as a defense or an offense? So there's a difference between charity and justice. So charity can put a Band-Aid on things. Is that how we're looking at community investment? Are we looking at community investment as seeking justice and saying, no, we're just gonna work on not having unaffordable housing, period? So I think those are discussions we need to have. And I love that Ben explained the peer city approach, because a lot of times people ask me, why do we do peer city approach? So thank you, Ben, for explaining that to me. I will take that back. I would caution that if we're talking about equity, that no one here goes into the community and says, well, Black people have it better here than they do in Memphis. So just, be careful when we're doing that peer city that there are limits there. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Unseld. Dr. Kelly Pryor.
Yeah, I'm so glad that Dr. Unseld ended with the idea of what is equity. And I really think we need to think back to authentic engagement as well as our board diversity and leadership diversity of our organizations, not falling into the realm of tokenism or manipulation. And so I used at the beginning this idea of California has mandated their boards have to have a woman on them as of January 2020, or the Ford Foundation really focusing on differently abled individuals and having to make sure that there is a board member. Let us be clear, right? In participation in communities and with authentic engagement, tokenism, that type of influence that happens on boards or in leadership, or having community members at the table to engage them in their questions or answers, that is very low off the ground from manipulation. So we can think of manipulation as the lowest rung of making sure that people are doing what we want to do. In tokenism, I had someone show up, right? Or I have the one Black person on my board, and that matters. What we really need to be focusing on or getting to is a place of equity and participation. Is there shared power? Are we authentically sharing our stories and sharing the ownership over something with community? So we can talk about community development and saying, are community members able to call the meetings and I show up? Or is it just when I call the meetings and I'm expecting community members to show up and respond? And similarly with the way that our boards look, is that someone should feel excited that they are in the room or they were invited to the table, or I'm going to that one person in the community that I know they're everywhere, and so I should have them on my board. I think Anne talked about that beautifully. It's not just about who do we know and how do we reach out to that person, of the people that either we know or the people who are in our circle and that they know, but how are we really expanding our understanding and our use of power in this community to say, you know what, I might not agree with your ideas at all, but we're here for the same mission and the purpose of advancing this community. And so I have to open myself up to that as well. And not everyone, let's be honest about what race is, right, in this community, because we're talking about race. Race is a social construction. What we have to be considerate of is the way that racism has played out in the context of things. So there are individuals who might have, quote unquote, a same racial background that may not have the same understanding in terms of how they are contextualizing the racism and how we need to not perpetuate that in our communities. So we also have to be really considerate of the thought process when we're trying to expand the diversity of our boards.
That brilliantly said, both of you. Thank you. I want to be very respectful of the time of our participants. We said we were going to do this for an hour. We're having a robust conversation. So I'd like to wrap here, and then we'll invite anyone who wants to stay on to continue to have some of this conversation for another 10 or 15 minutes. But I want to give people the space to leave. A couple of things that I want to say as we are going. First, this is intended very much to just be the beginning of this set of conversations around not just this data point, but the other data points that we can use to galvanize action and investment in our communities. So be on the lookout. We're going to have a series of deeper dives with some of these experts in addition to some national experts over the course of the next several weeks. So thank you for being here today. I'd like to give a great shout out to our panelists who were beautiful in both recording and live. And a real thank you to our board, without whom this would not be possible. The consistent investment of our philanthropic and corporate communities in these issues, even when they are very uncomfortable for the people involved. The fact that they continue to give money to things that call out all the things that we are not doing well, I think is a credit to them, though obviously much more work to be done. And I want to particularly thank the staff of the Greater Louisville Project for their tireless work on this very difficult set of data and engagement and processes. So Dr. Unseld, Harrison Kirby, Dr. Nate Kratzer, and Ali Goldberg, who also orchestrated this event while suffering from COVID. So thank you very much, Ali. I want to leave with two thoughts. One is, when we think about investing in our community, we recognize that we cannot shame or punish people into additional investment. We have to inspire them. So I would invite people to think about and potentially share in the chat, what is the investment that you have made in Louisville in terms of time or money of which you are the most proud? What have you done that you feel really good about? Because that is what is going to motivate you to do more. And then the second thing is, if you had the resources to invest in one thing to make Louisville better, what would it be? And part of what we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks is inviting over social media people to answer that question, and a la Ice Bucket Challenge, to challenge some of their peers. What is the investment that they would make to make Louisville better? Because there is no way that we are going to get different results if we don't change both the volume and the process by which we invest in our own community and the people who are invited to that table in every sense. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to invite anyone who wants to depart. Otherwise, we'll continue to work through some of the Q&A. Thank you guys so much. All right, so one of the questions that keeps being asked is about how do we let's see here. How do we get more collaboration? How do we invite different sets of people to the table? And I would love to get some thoughts, particularly from some of the people who've been deep in this work. I know, Gina, you have been at the front end of this. Can you talk a little bit about what authentic engagement looks like from your perspective?
Yes. I like the word proximity, right? So you can't do authentic engagement from your desktop, or at least now that we're in a Zoom, post-COVID digital world, I guess you can. But, it's very simple. If you have that intention, if you have that desire, then don't wait for those people to find you. You have to set out to find those people, whoever that group represents. If you're looking for diversity, if you're looking for diversity of opinions amongst, people of the same ilk, you have to set the intention to go find those people and engage, like, authentically, in honesty and transparency, maybe building up the courage, to ask sensitive questions, but then also building up the courage to hear the truth mirrored back to you. And I think the more that we set the intention and actually put action behind that, then you will develop and nurture proximity, which to me is the most authentic form of engagement.
I'm seeing that all of our city participants have had to hop off because I think there's some really important questions around taxation. So Shekinah, if I can just say, I hope I'm not butchering your name too much, that we will absolutely follow up on the issues of taxation and the engagement of Metro government that you have raised. And I'm sorry, we don't have the right people to answer that question here. Amy, we've had a couple of questions about what is the level of investment in LHOME or other CDFIs that would be enough, that you could handle. What is there a number that you could handle in terms of forwarding that investment?
Well, there are two parts of that. One is what's the need in community for the deployment of that investment. The need is great. For example, when we launched the Small Business Continuity Loan program with the City of Louisville and other partners, to help very small businesses, primarily minority and women-owned businesses that we were really worried weren't going to get PPP and EIDL funds quickly enough to pay their staffs, to pay their rents. We raised over $1.6 million within a couple of weeks, and we deployed all of that within 6 weeks during a pandemic virtually, and made sure that we dispersed that money within 48 hours of getting completed applications. We had over $10 million of demand for that product from very small businesses, okay? So what I see in community is tremendous demand for cooperative ownership, small business ownership, home ownership. We need hundreds of millions of more capital. $10 million, $20 more million. And what we do is we use that as a revolving loan fund. And guys, I want you to know we had less than 1% of loan losses going into the pandemic. So, you know, bankers make less risky loans. We're making riskier loans, but what we do is we're looking at character, and we're looking at your business plan, and we're looking at your future projection, and we're making good investments, and everybody's paying us back because we build trust in our borrowers, and then we work on technical assistance and financial coaching and all that stuff, trust building. And then they want to build us back because they know their neighbor and their aunt and their cousin needs that loan to spur their ownership and their dreams. So we need more investment, but L-Home, there's tremendous demand. We could handle $10, $20 million more of an investment. And we just talked to the Community Foundation of Louisville, several board members. They asked the same question about impact investing in us, in loans that we would repay them. And I said, we could easily handle 10 to 20 more million. So there is a tremendous need for much more investment into these kinds of ownership products and services in our LMI neighborhoods.
Yeah, and I really want to honor that and appreciate the work that you are doing, as well as so many of the people in this group. I'm sad that we are not able to be face-to-face, and I look forward to the time that we can do that. We've got several areas for continued engagement, but I'm going to go ahead and wrap here. So thank you all so much for your time and participation. Really look forward to using this as a moment to catalyze additional investment in making Louisville the community that we want it to be. Thank you guys so much.